Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Today we're talking about Brad Felver's story, Orphans, which was first published in Subtropics and then um, won an O. Henry Award, which is where I read it. And I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to share the screen. And one of the barriers to doing this for me, oopsie, hello, let me think here, 1 second. One of the barriers to doing this for me was that I'm doing this on my own. No, I do not want that. Sorry about that. I'm doing this on my own. And so, like I'm not making any money doing it and I don't want to pay for production. So I realized that this is going to be um, just very casual. Let's put it that way. This will be super casual. And we're doing this or I'm doing this just because I love short stories and this is what I find fun. And I hope you get something out of it. But please don't judge me for this technological blah that I because I'm just putting it out there. No editing, no nothing. We're just going to do it for fun. So anyway, okay, here we go. So what I did and what I like to do is I like to go through the story several times, right? So this one is called Brad Felver, Orphans, First Impressions. And so you'll notice here that I'm just highlighting some of the things I noticed first. Um, this is a 9,000 word story, which is extremely long. If you're trying to get a story published, you're going to have some issues with a 9,000 word story. Mostly literary magazines like 3,500 to 6,000 words. 6,000 would be a lot. So you have to be pretty good to get a 9,000 word story published, but Subtropics did it, so kudos to them. Let's start here with the first thing I noticed. I mean, the descriptions are unbelievable. And the first sentence catches your eye right away, right? When Gus took an apprentice, a kid eager as a chipmunk, he didn't expect it to last. And that's one thing we'll learn about Gus over and over again is that he's not expecting much at this point in his life. Um, and so, he's done this a million times before and it never works out. What really stops kids is the sanding, which they always find incredibly tedious. And that's where he loses them. So he just never allows himself to get too close to them. And so what he calls it is a brief spike of companionship before he returns to the long quiet. Um, and then we find out there are all these rumors going around about Gus because he doesn't interact, right? And that he has secrets, but of course, everybody has their share of secrets. Um, but anyway, so then, 1 second, I'm getting a little glare here. I'm trying to get rid of that. I can't see. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, so I'm gonna do one thing here so I don't get glare. There we go. You'll just hear me talking for a little bit. Okay, so so the rumors got the old man wrong, but we don't know quite what his story is, right? I mean, he is very ordinary. Megan is struck by that. And then here comes Ruth. So one thing I'll bring up later is I did a POV outline of like how the POV switches throughout this, but at first we can at least notice that this first section here through here is in Gus's POV, right? And then we switch to Macon's POV that goes roughly to right here. And now we're in Ruth's, and Ruth is Gus's ex-wife. Okay, and here we go. Like, I think this is what makes the story stand out is the world was a great choir. She stood there nestled in its rose, but now she did not sing. I mean, I think like that's amazing. And it's a 3-part sentence, right? And I think that's what separates great writers from the rest of us maybe, is that they go that extra mile, right? So the world is a great choir. She stood there nestled in its rose. That would have been a really great sentence, but it's that addition of but now she did not sing that really makes it a standout for me. It's like that elongated, or like it's almost like great writers press the thought. They press on the thought until they get to the deeper meaning. And I don't know how they do that, but they do. Okay, so here we go. We find out that she is still calling her partner of 20 years, Harold Gutman. So he has his full name, so that is a distance. And then she couldn't remember the last time he kissed her goodbye. I just want to note here how in this very short section right here, we learn all we need to know pretty much about that relationship and what's been going on in her life for the last 20 years. And then she slips into this almost stream of consciousness here. It's a different, it feels different, the syntax. Gus and Annabelle and backyard full of wet leaves. Annabelle running and jumping and skinning her knees. Ornery as a badger 1 minute. It's almost like you know, it feels like stream of consciousness there. And then we go to Dear Gus. So look at this. Harold Gutman, her partner of the past 20 years, and then Dear Gus. And then the description of that marriage. So see how like succinct this is? It's amazing. There's Harold Gutman, 3 lines. Here's Gus, 4 lines. We know everything, and we're on page 2. A marriage like a defiance of destiny. It was worth any catastrophe in its way. They'd crashed into each other like asteroids. And here's one of those sentences, one of these descriptions that is just a little bit deeper than average, right? They'd crashed into each other like asteroids. A lot of people would have stopped there. But then he goes on, a wild intensity to that sort of love, an entire lifetime crammed into a dozen years. Life packed so densely it needed an atomic number, but then Annabelle died and everything ruptured. Okay, and then the lost years. So we now know that just like Gus, she's been lost. A swift divorce, 2 decades of silence. They just couldn't even talk to each other. She settled in. It's not like she fell in love with Harold Gutman. She settled in with Harold Gutman. I got to outline that, even though I didn't the first time. That's amazing. It was companionship, not entirely without love. But Gus had the courage to remain alone. So now we know she's just settled because she didn't want to be alone. Then they crashed into each other again. And now, I mean, I just don't know where these come from. It's like shocking. Hearing his voice through the receiver left Ruth feeling like Moses hearing the voice of God. It's just so worth it trying to find good descriptions. Okay. So now we've got some parallels. And I remember when I was talking to George Saunders in an earlier interview, he said something about having a double in a story. And in some ways, I mean, Macon is a little bit like a double, right? He's sad too. He's lost his parents. He's a lot like, Gus is recognizing the sadness. He's recognizing the grief. And maybe he's also recognizing himself when he was younger. You get a little sense of that. And he's hardly a kid, really. He's going to be 18. One thing I want to ask when I talk to Brad, which I don't have the answer to, is about woodworking and removing the wood. You can't add, you can only remove. And once it's gone, you can't put it back. I mean, in a way, I guess removing the wood is like life, right? And then he spoke of woodworking as the art of shadow making. Shadow lines as design features on desks and tables. So there's a lot about shadows, and there's a sense that Annabelle is a shadow cast over their life, right? So that makes sense, but there's more to it, and I just haven't gotten it yet, unfortunately. Okay. Um, and there's a lot of references to oak trees. That's another thing I'm going to ask him about oak trees. Brilliant the way an oak tree is brilliant just by being itself, I guess. um, at this point, I do want to ask, this is another question I'm going to ask during the interview is, Macon says here, if you like the work, I'm sorry, Macon said, Macon wants to speed things up. And Gus says, if you like the work, why invent ways to rush through it? Um, and I don't know, there's a feeling that, you know, for me, like maybe Gus is hiding in the work and um and uh, and being too accepting of the things that are tedious. I mean, maybe you need to do that, but maybe not, right? Maybe some things you can let some things go. Um, let's see here. Okay, so then we find out, here's my note. So sometimes the kid forgot to reset the farmer's deadbolt and the workshop door would catch in the wind, flap back and forth like a sail. If the sun was just right, it would throw shadows across the barnyard. Long, lean shadows, shadows sharp as blades, arcing in wide parabolas. The first time Gus saw them, it pulled him up short. Shadows seemed to remake the barnyard physically. He stared as a little boy seeing fireworks for the first time. So you're seeing something different. So we know later, we learn that he, has that. Well, we learn in the story that he has this farmer's deadbolt because the doorknob's broken and Annabelle broke the doorknob and he's never gotten it fixed. Um, But I said here, the boy forgets something crucial, which allows Gus to see the world in a new way. And it feels they're both dangerous and illuminating. But since I'm going to have the pleasure of talking to Brad, I'm going to ask him a little bit more about that. Um, so it's interesting. Gus wanted the kid to pace himself. This kind of work accumulated. He'd feel old long before he actually was. Hmm. Okay. There's a lot about the orphan in the town that didn't have orphans. I mean, in some ways, it feels to me in the story like everybody is an orphan. So I'm going to ask him about the concept of orphans. I'm going to ask him about all of the talk of being prejudiced against orphans and prejudiced against people who are homeless. Like, that's really interesting. And I'm just not sure what he was getting at there. So I'm going to ask him about that. Here's another great description. The kid got sheepish as a bird dog. Gus could feel him coiling up like a snake that was afraid it might need to strike. Okay, here's one of those sentences that I was talking about earlier where a great writer just presses on a description and unfurls it in a way that you don't see lesser writers doing. Gus could feel him coiling up is something that a lesser writer might write. Gus could feel him coiling up like a snake. That's a little bit better, right? But Gus could feel him coiling up like a snake that was afraid it might need to strike. He could have said Gus could feel him coiling up like a snake that might strike. But need to strike is another level. So in my mind, there's like 4 levels to that thought. And so that's one of the things I'm really trying to work on in my own writing. And um, if I were teaching this as a class, I would say, slow down, like Gus is saying in the story, and like really press on the thought because there's more to unpack than just the initial thought that you have. Coiling up is much more than just coiling up. Okay. Da da da. All he wants to do is work with wood. Okay, this struck me as so true. Gus remembered youth barely. He'd spent the first half of his life exploring the world and the second half retreating from what he'd discovered. That just seems so true. Um, he hadn't hugged another person in years, not since his daughter 30 years earlier. Although I did note later that Ruth does hug him. They do meet up after 10 years and she does hug him. So it's interesting. I don't know if he doesn't hug back or what's going on there, but And then I wrote here, by highlighting the loneliness and making it so extreme, we really feel for Gus in the moment. Okay. Keep going. I don't want to go on forever. Let's see. Okay, Sunday evenings the phone would ring. So this is through Megan's eyes, but he seemed lighter afterwards. He seemed like he was dancing. So he's observing that these phone calls are just making his Gus's day. They don't know how to talk to each other at all. They need Ruth to intervene because the two of them are so alike. They're almost like the old and young version of the same person. And without Ruth, they cannot get through to each other. They just can't make that leap. And we find out she has lymphoma, but it's very slow moving. So it's like she's almost got this illness like that's a manifestation of what life is like, because in life, um, I mean, we're all dying very slowly, right? But this is a manifestation of disease in which you acknowledge that you're dying slowly, but it's not imminent. Okay. Okay, so I have to acknowledge the one part that caught me, that sort of took me back, aback, is that this part about Gus noticing that Macon still held, or let's see, more than a year in the old house, and Macon still held his pee in the middle of the night because of the creaky floors. And then later we find out that Gus has noticed that he might hold his pee. And I thought, that was the only thing that in this whole magnificent story that I was like, really? I don't know. That seemed far-fetched, but that's a pretty small little quibble. Okay, how about this one? The kid stayed drawn taut as a clothesline. Amazing. Okay. And here we go. He somehow allows this distance here. It's, of course, I'm just going to highlight that a different color. The woman laughed at that. And it was such oh, I can barely see it with that color. Hold on a second. I don't want to do it. So it's like, no. Here we go. The woman laughed at that. And it was such a genuine, okay, stop that. Stop. Uh-oh. Anyway, we notice the distance between Macon and Ruth at this point because he's calling her the woman. That's very subtle, but it works. I mean, he could have said, Ruth laughed at that, but then we wouldn't realize how distant Macon is, what a stranger she is to Macon. But then Ruth didn't follow up with any more questions, and Gus didn't offer any explanations, and the kids' presence hung over them like rain clouds. And this is a switch to the kids' presence, not Macon's. So this is another moment where I'm like, why did we switch to that? That's fascinating. Okay. But I think it's just to show the distance between the perceptions. They're seeing him as the kid when they're a couple. Talk about Annabelle, and then there's this stuff about being prejudiced, which I'm going to ask about. And then there's this strange moment where we realize that for whatever reason, I gotta make a note of this, Gus has not been paying him. I'm going to have to ask, why hasn't Gus been paying him again? Because Gus is the one who grew up without money. And it's interesting to me that Ruth, the person who had money, who money doesn't really matter to, she notices this first. She has Mayflower money, which is like she's always had money. Her family's always had money. So how come she notices this? And does Gus just feel like he's being generous, more generous than he is? I mean, maybe Gus's definition of generosity is pretty limited, because he thinks he's giving the kid a place to stay and he's teaching him, and that's about all he needs to do. Okay. Gives him the $87,000, which I was like, whoa, what kind of woodworking are we doing here? But that's crazy. Okay. The old man was a better driver. Macon was more aggressive. The old man put Ruth's number on so he puts the phone number on the fridge without saying you should thank her, which I thought was kind of cute. Okay, and here we jump forward in time, which is something that Jennifer Egan did in Safari. I don't know if you've read that story, but it's unbelievable. And I mean, it really makes a huge difference because then we realize, I mean, it's very hard to do that, to just slip into the future here. We spent almost the entire story with people who are trapped in the past, and then we realize how this present moment is going to affect this kid, Macon, and it's going to become his past. And it says here, memory of this moment would hum through Macon for the rest of his life, swelling and elongating through time. Sometimes it was dread that overcame him, the feeling that he'd inserted himself into some generational tension he wasn't old enough to understand. Other times he was convinced that it was only Ruth's sense of decorum that had made her agree. To decline his invitation would have been tantamount to admitting that he was a mere tenant. No, she had to come. It wasn't until years later, when the old man lay dying in hospice, that the old man thanked Macon, reached out for him. Tremors ran through his hands. Their fingers touched. You were the child, he said, who appears in the doorway when his parents are fighting. Okay, and here we've switched when the old man. There's like this slipping in and out of intimacy that's happening very subtly, where they're seeing each other as sort of like archetypes, right? Oh, come on, the old man. I wanted to highlight. They're seeing each other's archetypes here, the old man, the old woman, the boy. I wonder if there's some reference being made here. Okay, I'm gonna write this down too. This is like a fairy tale. Is this some sort of fairy tale? Fairy tale, the old man, the old woman. Is this the gingerbread boy? Gingerbread boy? I mean, it could be, right? Maybe you guys have already thought of it. My God, the gingerbread boy. I had not thought of that. That's like 4 readings in. Okay. Because, yeah, the gingerbread boy. I mean, it's except that it's a daughter. Okay. They open the kid a bank account. I think I messed up. He bought the new doorknob. And then we hear that Harold Gutman gets very nervous about Ruth's trip. I mean, he ought to be. And then we find out here's Macon again, quiet as an oak tree. Here comes the oak tree again. All his energy reserved for listening. Okay, she keeps a, see, this is where she hugs him. Oh, they embraced. Okay, so he forgot. They did embrace. So he had one embrace in those 30 years. Okay, I'm just saying. It wasn't that bad, Gus. All right. Okay. He went quiet, held the doorknob in his hands as it was the most precious thing ever. Okay, one thing. All right, 5 readings in here. I don't know what happened to Annabelle, right? I don't think after 5 readings of this story that they ever say. What if he did say, and I've read it 5 times and I'm now announcing that I missed it. I'm really embarrassed, but as I said, this is just for fun, so don't judge me. I am having fun. Okay, but I really don't know how Annabelle died. She did not die when she fell off the doorknob because I read it like 10 times, figured that was the moment. People cast longer shadows in death than they had in life. I think that I looked up, so this is something I like to do too. I go to edit, find and replace, and then I look up the word that I'm wondering about, like the word shadow, how many times? Yeah, 24 mentions of shadow. So this is huge. That's a huge word here. Annabelle, let's just see if we find out how she died and I missed it. Nope, they're playing in the backyard. Yep, okay, the grape juice crusted into her nose hairs. So Annabelle's ghost. Oops, sorry. Let's see. Yep, she's swinging on the doorbell, but that is not where she died. So see, I'm pretty darn sure now we do not know. Ruth, 41 times. Gus, 91 times. You know, because sometimes you wonder when there's three point of views, who is the actual main character? 91 times. And then Macon. Ooh, look at that. Okay, Macon. Interesting. I gotta write that down. Macon, oops. Macon, 98. Gus, 91. I don't know about you. I knew Ruth was not the main focus. Hold on, how many times was Ruth? 41. But that surprises me. I would have thought that we heard more about Gus. I kind of thought this was Gus's story, but we've got more mentions of Macon. So I'm going to ask that question too. When he started writing the story, who was he thinking this was a story about? Okay. Where are we now? Okay. I don't want to bore you guys to death. His life hadn't gone the way he hoped. Yeah, so he feels about taking care of Macon like he was sharing water with a stranger in the desert. Hardly anything at all, really. And then she gives him permission, right? She's like, you're allowed to love him. And I think without her giving that permission, he could not have done it. I mean, he felt like it was a betrayal. And then, okay, there's this beautiful passages at the end. They went quiet again. Night had come out on like a sigh. They couldn't see Macon, but they watched the space where he was. It felt like they were sitting inside a silence they'd made themselves. High green corn on all sides like a palisade. Who would ever have noticed them and who would have cared? A farm that looked like farms do, a bleak, forgettable place. Three quiet people, not even related, people ordinary as dandelions. Who would have even paused to stare? Gus would have stayed there forever, the three of them, motionless but not, together but not, as every family is, but they were the rare family that understood this. Okay, and then I'm going to go down to this last half of this paragraph. They didn't talk, but it felt like they did. There was no music, but it felt like there was. There was the sea of corn trembling under the breeze, and there was the kid across the barnyard putting a new doorknob on the workshop door. He was humming. It felt like the world had just taken a breath. It felt like they were dancing. It could have been really cheesy, him replacing that doorknob. I mean, it's so obvious, but the way that he buries it here at the end with around all this other beautiful imagery. And we get it because this has been so quiet and such a long slog for Gus that it's all about these feelings that they're having. They're not expressing every feeling. They didn't talk, but it felt like they did. Like they're connected again, which is just so amazing. I'm going to close this one out. That was just first impressions. Oh boy. Okay, I'm going to just see if I missed anything because then I have. Hold on a second. POV, second pass. I don't think I missed anything. But see, I mean, I just like to read things over and over again. This is where I got the word count. Anything we missed? Annabelle is the shadow. That's where I got it in the second reading. Okay, not that much, but then I just want you to see one last thing and then I'm going to end the POV paths. So this is where I just did, I mapped out the POV switches. Okay, so it's Gus at first, and then it's Macon, and then the green. Okay, let me make it smaller. Sorry. That's how blind I am. Okay. We got Gus, we got Macon, and then we have Ruth. And this is kind of how it flows back and forth. Oh, and the blue here is just where it's like omniscient. Okay, so then we got Gus, Macon. I mean, he's pretty diligent about Gus, Macon, Gus. There is a lot of Gus. Macon, a little bit of Ruth. So we need Ruth, but she's just not the main focus. This is all Macon. And then Gus, Macon. Look at that. This is sort of where I felt like it was omniscient, where we really, okay, see these words that are mistaken. So I got a PDF from Subtropics and they were so nice, and you should subscribe to them because they did not have to do that. And I'm going to put a link for a subscription. But when I tried to transfer this, because I have to write on the manuscript, when I transferred it over from the PDF, all of these FTs became Ks. I have no idea why. Okay, so look, then there's, this is omniscient. It felt like omniscient. I mean, where you just can't tell who's saying it. Okay, Gus, then Ruth, and Macon, a very short little piece of The Old Man Smiled Again. He knew what Macon was doing. So it's weird, right? He just slips in a little bit of the old Gus's POV, but that's okay because we know we can do that. Little seems seemingly omniscient. And then I'm going to see if he meant to go omniscient or if he was just describing and not attributing, and it didn't really matter to him. So I'm going to ask that question. There's a little bit of Ruth. And then here we go. A lot of omniscient, all omniscient at the end, right? This is like God looking down on them or whoever. All right. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope that helped in some way, and I appreciated you being here. I appreciate all the paid subscribers. It means a lot to me. And I will look forward to putting up the interview with Brad, hopefully November 1st. Thanks. Bye. Oh, here I am still on, and I haven't turned off the recording.